Okay, we'll call the meeting of the State Allocation Board to order. Ms. Jones, will you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Senator Wilk?
Present.
Senator Leyva?
Here.
Senator Roth? Assemblymember O'Donnell? Assemblymember Cunningham? Assemblymember Burke? Juan Morales?
Here.
Cesar Diaz?
Here.
Daniel Kim? And Gail Miller.
Here.
Well, we don't yet have a quorum.
We don't yet have a quorum, but but Mr. Kim
And
is
Daniel
outside the
Kim.
door.
All right, we have a quorum.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I was hoping, but I may wait a minute, to welcome Ms. Burke, who is our newest member, and also to thank Mr. Nazarian, who was the longest serving State Allocation Board member at 6 years. Yeah, so if you see him, give him a Lifetime Achievement Award, because as we all know, this was really hard work, especially over the last 6 years. So we're really grateful to him. And then after the executive officer's statement, we do have a presentation, and thank you to the Attorney General's office for being here. They're going to come up and present an information item. It's an overview of the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. And for those of you that are not aware, I'm glad some of the stakeholders are in the audience and staff, because the rules around Bagley-Keene and the Open Meeting Act that we all comply with are indeed for all of us and not just those people on the board. So it is really important. We haven't had one in a while, so we thought it was a good time to do that. And then we have the action related to the facility hardship regulation changes has been postponed from this agenda. We wanted to make sure that folks had a lot of time. We have a new member, and we really do want to start having stakeholder processes where we continue, as we have been, to take input. And we've heard from many of you, so we're going to postpone it for today and hope to really focus on some of these issues around how to reimburse for costs in the future. It is a really important issue. We are grateful to LAUSD for bringing it forward and Mr. Nazarian for starting it, so you'll see us continuing to discuss that in the future. And finally, at the end of today's meeting, the board will meet in closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 11126E1. for the purpose of conferring with and receiving advice from counsel regarding pending litigation. So with that, Ms. Silverman, do you want to, let's approve the minutes first from the January 22nd meeting.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Senator Wilk, seconded by Mr. Diaz. Ms. Jones?
Senator Wilk?
Aye.
Senator Leyva?
Aye.
Juan Morales?
Aye.
Cesar Diaz?
Aye.
Daniel Kim?
Aye.
Gail Miller?
Aye.
And that motion carries.
Great, thank you very much.
Would you like to leave it open?
Please,
Okay,
thank
will do.
you.
Hi, it's a lighter update today. So we just want to give the board an update on the 6th Career Tech Education filing round. That round is open, although the closing date for CDE had wrapped up in October, and we are still receiving scores from Department of Education, which is awesome news. So we had reported in our report that there were 71 scores that we did receive earlier during the month, but we also wanted to highlight that we did receive 115 scores just this week. So we're excited about the flow of information that's coming to our office. But again, those who have a higher score of 105 or higher, or your previous score, you can submit a funding application to our office. So we are continuing to work with districts to ensure that they don't miss this important timeline to access the $250 million that is available. So again, wanted to highlight that. And we actually had a workshop yesterday for full day kinder grant program, and that is in effect for the $300 million. The filing round opens in April, and it closes in the end of April. And again, that's an opportunity for those folks who don't have full day kinder facilities to access the program. So again, that workshop was offered yesterday, and it will be on the webcast. And so if you didn't have the ability to watch it live or participate live in the meeting room, it is available on our website. And that's about it. Our next meeting is March 25th.
Great, thank you very much. So we are now going to call from the Attorney General's office, please, if you could make your way up to the dais. Yeah, I was going to have Mr. Patton introduce them, but I just thought we could have everyone come on up while you're doing that, Mr. Patton. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it would be my pleasure to introduce a couple of attorneys from my alma mater, the Government Law Section of the Attorney General's Office, Ted Prim and Julia Zuffalato. Ted has been with the DOJ since 1983, and Julia has been with since 13 years ago, I think around 2007, 2006. Both of them previously worked with the Fair Political Practices Commission. Ted for 8 years as a staff counsel and as executive director, and Julia was on staff at the FPPC as well for about 9 years. They do a lot of work with ethics, and they are the team that provides open meeting law, Bagley-Keene training to all sorts of boards and commissions and agencies throughout the state. So my pleasure to introduce Ted Prim and Julia Zuccolato.
And if I may welcome Ms. Burke, thank you. We are very grateful for your service and happy to welcome you to the committee, and we will mark you as here as well. Thank you very much, Ms. Burke. Okay, please, Mr. Prim and Ms. Zuccolato.
Okay. Thank you very much for having us here today for the Magical Mystery Tour for the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. And I'll start by laying the cards on the table face up. When people come to the Bagley-Keene Act for the first time in particular, they find it frustrating, inefficient, and it forces them out of their natural patterns of communication, and people find that annoying also. And let's face it, at heart, we're all networkers. So what we want to do is we want to call people on the phone, we want to text them, we want to email them, we want to find out what they're thinking, we want to build coalitions, and we want to know what we're going into before, for example, we come to a meeting like this. The problem is that the Bagley-Keene Act wants us to do that in public and not in these one-on-one communications. So let's take a look at a little bit of history and kind of see how we got here. So as I said, sometimes the Bagley-Keene Act is criticized for its inefficiency. If you want to maximize inefficiency, what we would do is create a department head kind of structure. So a pyramidal structure with a single decision maker at the top, and let that person decide what kind of decision-making process you want to have. But that's not what the legislature did here. Instead, or in this case, the Constitution, opted for a multi-member body. And what that does is it brings a variety of people together with different backgrounds, different experiences, and different viewpoints. And it has them come together, and through debate and deliberation and give and take, they arrive at a consensus decision. And going through that process is not one that happens automatically. It takes time to go through that process. And so that's where some of the feeling of frustration comes, that you can't do things as quickly. But the other thing that happened is that the Bagley-Keene Act was enacted. And what it said was, when you go through this consensus building process, we want the public to have a seat at the table. And so the open meeting process, the notice, 10-day notice and agenda process, public testimony, access to public records, all of these things are the ways in which we make sure that the public gets its seat at the table during this process. When we have a closed session, or more importantly, when we have serial communications, which we'll talk about later, then what happens is that the public is deprived of their opportunity to participate. So if we keep the history and the background of multi-member bodies and public participation in mind, it helps to explain, and I think it helps to make a little easier, the construct that the Bagley-Keene requires people to go through in order to make sure that these goals are accomplished. So that's kind of our overlook, and what we're going to do is at each segment of the presentation, we'll stop for questions. If you can't wait till we get to that part, you can interrupt and ask at the time, but at each segment we will stop. So this is kind of the introductory overlook background stage. Does anybody want to talk about any of that? Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Julia.
Mr. Prim, just one question regarding how this body was created as part of also the executive branch. And just to clarify that all of these boards and commissions for which the executive branch has a seat at the table are all subject to Bagley-Keene. So there's many of those, and they're all subject to the same requirements. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you very
Right.
much.
So, thank you. So that's right. The Bagley-Keene Act applies to multi-member state bodies, and the act has within its definition. There's 5 types of state bodies, and of course, the first one is any body created by statute or the state constitution, which the State Allocation Board was created by the state constitution, so it is subject to Bagley-Keene and all of its members. The second type of state body are advisory bodies that are created by a state body or a state body member, such as a subcommittee. An advisory body must have at least 3 members, and it is advisory only, so it makes recommendations to a state body. It does not have decision-making authority. It must be created by formal action of the state body or a state body member, but the courts have construed formal action to be any action taken by a board to create a state body. So, for example, if a state body directs an executive director to create an advisory body, then the court will consider that advisory body to have been created by the state body, and it will be subject to Bagley-Keene. And advisory bodies can also include what we call impromptu advisory bodies created by state body members. This could happen where you have 3 members of a state body who develop a pattern of routinely meeting outside of a state body to discuss business of that particular state body. Over time, if this happens enough, those 3 members may inadvertently create an advisory body that is subject to Bagley-Keene. A third type of state body are delegated bodies, and these are if a state body has statutory authority to delegate its decision-making authority, it may have an executive committee where it exercises decision-making authority between meetings of a parent state body. It's usually some type of executive committee, and it must have at least 2 members. And a delegated body is one subject to Bagley-Keene. A fourth type of state body would be any state body created by executive order of the governor. And the final type of state body is one could be a public or a private body where a member of a state body serves on the other body in their official capacity as a member of the state body, and that other body receives funding from the state body. The one thing to keep in mind is that the Bagley-Keene requirements apply upon appointment or election. So it's even before you've attended your first meeting or you've taken your oath of office.
So the next question is, what is a meeting? And this really frequently comes down to be the meat of the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. The most obvious type is the kind we're having here today, where the state body comes together in an open public meeting and does its business. But whenever a majority of the members of a body discuss or deliberate or take action on issues that are under its jurisdiction, we have a meeting. That also includes gatherings where you're just receiving information, so some kind of public testimony, for example, that still constitute a meeting. But the biggie is that it covers these things called serial meetings. And a serial meeting is when you have a series of communications, none of which involve a majority of the body, but when taken together, do involve a majority of the body involved in discussions or deliberations on issues that are under the body's jurisdiction. It can happen through what we call a chain, which is A talks to B, B talks to C. In the case of a 5-member board where 3 would be a majority, A talks to B, B talks to C. That's 3. Hub and wheel, A talks to B, A talks to C. Intermediary, A asks a staff member to do something, different things like that. So I'll go through some hypotheticals in a minute. And it can happen face-to-face, it can happen by email, telephone, text, and a variety of things that I don't understand because I'm a dinosaur in the tech age. So, a couple of examples. Let's take the chain. As I indicated, in a 5-person body, if we have A talks about an agenda item with B and B talks with C, we have a majority involved. Now, on your body, if A talks to B and B talks to C, we don't have a violation as a general rule. Now, we have to always come back to Julia's discussion of advisory committees. If it happens to be committee members, then that's different. And if certain kinds of communications become routinized at some point, that can make a difference also. In the hub situation, if member A sends an email out to all members of the body, then that would be considered to be a serial meeting involving a majority of the body. If staff sends out the agenda and member A replies all and says, on item number 2, it's a really good project and we ought to approve it, and I hope you all will be on board, and if you have any questions, call me. We've also had a serial meeting at that point. For that reason, we advise staff when they send out mailings to all members of the body to put the members of the body in as BCCs so that they can't inadvertently put themselves in a serial meeting. Intermediary, that would be where A maybe asks a staff member, go tell B and C, or however many members it needs to make the majority, X. That person would then be acting as an intermediary. So it can happen in a number of ways, and you need to be conscious of it all the time. It's one of the reasons why we generally recommend that you limit your communications to just one other person. And most of the time then, unless you're on a 3-person advisory committee, you can avoid an inadvertent meeting. So if A talks to B, they're done. And we don't have to worry about them stumbling into a inadvertent serial meeting. Now that's frustrating because you might like to have a lot more communications, and I leave it to you as to how you want to do it. But the more communications you have, the more likelihood you're talking to A and or B and C, and you don't realize that B's talking to D and E, and C's talking to F and G, and now we've got a 7-person serial meeting going on, and we violated the law. So that's how it can happen. So again, the philosophy behind this is we're trying to create a situation where the public has a seat at the table, and every time we have these serial communications, the public is not having a seat at the table. They're deprived of their seat at the table. One last thing is there is a staff briefing exception. It's designed to help members be ready for meetings. So staff can talk to members of the body one at a time, separately, and find out if they have any questions or if they need any information. And then that conversation cannot be shared by staff with any other member of the body. And that's set up in the law that way in order to make sure that staff doesn't act as an intermediary in a serial meeting. So the purpose of it is to give the members the kind of information that they need in order to do the meeting. It's not to create a coalition or do some kind of sub rosa conduct of the meeting itself. Okay, any questions on that?
Any questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Prim. I have a couple of questions. One, what would how is the staff person treated in this regard? Not staff to the committee in this regard, but personal staff to the members, for example. Are they subject to the same requirements?
Yes. So, for example, if personal staff or board members came together, had a meeting to work out some issue and then go back to their person, then you've had a meeting of those three members with each other via their staff.
And then in terms of a lobbyist or a stakeholder, is that how would they conduct their business, ensuring that they get to make their positions known?
So the problem there becomes the lobbyist can have his or her communications with members of the board. What the board can't do is conduct a meeting through the lobbyist. So to use the most obvious approach, they can't orchestrate a meeting by using the lobbyist to communicate or build an issue or whatever. But you can't prohibit the lobbyist from meeting with different members. Now, the members can do things to make it less likely that they're going to have an issue or a violation, but each board member needs to determine whether and under what circumstances they're going to choose to meet with the lobbyist or not. It can't be an orchestrated situation. For example, if the chair were to say, Jane so-and-so is really very knowledgeable on this issue and she represents somebody who's very active in this arena, I would encourage you all to get together with her and meet her and talk to her about such and such. You would be orchestrating a meeting at that point.
Any other questions? Since we have two folks from the Attorney General, are we allowed to see if the public has questions on this just because it applies to other folks? Is that appropriate or not?
It is if you want. I mean, we're here to advise you, but we'll talk to.
Any public comment or questions on these? Well, no one is taking me up on that, so
Okay.
please proceed.
Well, now that we've gone over all the things that can't happen, there are a few exceptions to the requirement that a gathering of a majority must be noticed and be held in an open meeting. The first one was you guys talked about at length, which is a member of the board can have a conversation with one other person, whether it's staff, a board member, or a member of the public. So the same person can have a conversation with each of you about the same subject, as long as that isn't used as a way for the members to discuss that subject with each other. Another exception is that a majority of the board can attend a conference as long as they do not discuss board business among themselves at the conference. The conference must be open to the public and must cover a broad spectrum of issues and appeal to a broad spectrum of government officials. An admission fee is okay as long as it's open to the public. Two other examples include a majority of the board may attend a public meeting of another public body or organization, or a social gathering, again, as long as you're not discussing board business at these other events. With respect to standing committees of the board, you may, as a majority of the board can attend a standing committee meeting, as long as the board members who are not members of that standing committee attend only as observers and not participate in that standing committee meeting. Finally, a majority of the board can receive one-way legal advice from its legal counsel as long as you do not discuss the content of that legal advice among yourselves outside of a meeting. If none of these apply and you're going to go ahead and hold a meeting, there are notice requirements and an agenda that must be made available to the public. And our office is happy to advise your staff on any of these requirements. So we're going to kind of skip over that part of the handout, but there's more information on that in the hand that we'll be giving to you after our presentation.
Thank you very much.
Okay, shall I go next?
Yeah.
So I'm going to briefly touch on some of the public rights at meetings. So the first thing is members of the public can attend meetings without having to give their names. Now, since that was put into the law, we had 9/11, and the adjustment that has been made to that is security can ask people for their names, but they're not to be shared with the people who are conducting the meeting. So people still have the right to attend a state government meeting anonymously, but security still gets to do its job. If you have sign-up sheets, it should be made clear that filling out the sign-up sheet is a voluntary thing and not something that is required. Similarly, we have informally advised that the speaker cards should be voluntary as well. If people don't want to give their name when they speak, that's fine. You can evaluate their testimony for whatever weight you want to give it. But there are certainly circumstances where we can easily recognize that people may have a certain privacy interests that they want to protect, but they still want to be able to tell their story to the board. Generally, meetings can be recorded, either audio or video. The exception to that is if the recording constitutes a persistent disruption of the meeting. So temporary disruption of the meeting, if somebody's banging things around a little bit, setting up their camera or their recording device is not enough to prevent them from doing it, but if it's persistent, it is. People, what the law says that people, the public, have the right to testify before or during each item. I think the way in which the public testimony is most easily integrated into consideration of the issue is if the public's testimony comes during the same time period as the agenda item is being presented. The law also indicates that you can hear from the public on items that are not on your agenda, but you cannot deliberate on those. So this is to give the public an opportunity to call something to the board's attention, but the board can't act on it or deliberate on it because the public hasn't had the notice of it so that they know to be here and give their side of the story. So you can either refer to staff or you can put something on a future agenda, but what you can't do is take it up and substantively consider it at that point. You can put limitations on testimony, the time that people testify, but it should be reasonable under the circumstances. And again, keeping in mind that the purpose of this process is still to provide for public participation. So we still want to have it done in a way that the public gets to get its views across. But there are times that there needs to be some restrictions on it. Okay, that's it.
Thank you very much. Any Other questions? Any public comment before you go on? Sorry, Ms. Buffalo. Okay, thank you.
I'm going to move on to closed sessions. The general rule is that meetings have to be open to the public, but there could be some competing policy considerations, and there are a number of closed session exceptions that are in the Bagley-Keene Act. The state constitution specifically requires that these exceptions be narrowly construed, and you cannot hold a closed session unless there is specific authorization for it. It's a laundry list. Some are specific to state agencies, and others have more general applicability. I'm not going to go over every single one here, but there are two that are very common that state bodies use that I can generally describe. The first is the personnel exception. Despite its name, it's not something you can use for every time you want to discuss personnel. It's limited. The purpose is to protect the privacy of the employee and to promote frank discussion among the state body members. It applies when the board would like to consider the employment, evaluation, dismissal of an employee, and or to consider the discipline or dismissal of an employee based on a complaint or charge against the employee. If you are going to hold a meeting to consider discipline or dismissal of an employee based on a complaint or charge, whether it's from someone outside the agency or inside the agency, you must give the employee a 24-hour written notice of the closed session, and they have a right to ask that the matter be heard in open session. But even if the information is presented in open session, you still have the ability to go into closed session to deliberate on that information. The employee doesn't have a right to demand to go to closed session to make their case under that personnel exception. The next one that comes up a lot is the pending litigation exception. This gives you the opportunity to meet in closed session to meet with your legal counsel to discuss pending litigation. So it's not an opportunity to talk to legal counsel about anything, but only with respect to strategy on pending litigation. The purpose of this is to not prejudice the agency in the litigation. Litigation is pending under three circumstances. The first one is if you are a named party in litigation. The second one is if you want to initiate litigation. And the third one is if the board faces substantial exposure to litigation. Substantial exposure is more than just we think we might get sued on this if we take this action. It's usually something more concrete, like a demand letter or some type of written something from an attorney saying we're going to sue you. So that's something to keep in mind. There are procedures. If you hold a closed session, there are specific procedures that need to be followed. In the agenda, you have to identify that it's a closed session and the statutory authority for holding it. When you are, and you obviously have been doing this, when you're in open session, you must announce that you're going to go into closed session and announce the agenda item. And then the public has an opportunity to comment on that before you go into closed session. At least one staff person must be in closed session to record the topics discussed, but only essential personnel may be in the closed session. When you receive any information or discussions in closed session, that information is confidential and so cannot be disclosed outside of that closed session. The closed session is not an opportunity to stray into other topics, even if they're kind of related to the closed session matter. You really must just stick to what's on the agenda. with respect to the personnel, if you're making a personnel decision, then that must, when you, finally, when you are done with the closed session, you actually have to come back out into open session before you can adjourn the meeting. If you make a personnel decision, that personnel decision must be reported during the open session. With respect to pending litigation, the name of the case must, if this litigation has already started, the name of the case must be in the agenda and must be announced prior to meeting in closed session. And legal counsel must prepare a memorandum either before or within a week of the closed session describing the basis for holding the closed session. I think that's it for the closed session procedures.
Thank you.
So that's it, short and sweet, but I think it gives you the highlights, and so the only thing we would want to leave you with is the idea that the purpose of the Bagley Keene is to give the public a seat at the table, and therefore serial communications are to be avoided and business is to be done in open notice session.
I really appreciate your time. Any questions, Mr. Patton? Any other questions? No?
I just want to make a comment that, first of all, they have an outline of these points that they want to leave with the members, and there will be a copy available on the back table. Sam will put that out so members of the public can see the outline of points that these two attorneys are working from. And I also wanted to emphasize something that you pointed out at the beginning. Why is this board subject to Bagley Keene? And this is a rather unique board. In 2007, there was a report by the Little Hoover Commission about the SAB and its operations. It's a very interesting read. And as a condition precedent to issuing that report, the Hoover Commission asked Ledge Counsel to confirm that this is in fact an executive board, which Ledge Counsel did in a written opinion. Otherwise, the Hoover Commission would not have undertaken to do that analysis. And this is a very unique creature because this board, which meets typically in legislative offices, not always, but in a legislature, and is comprised of 6 legislative members, is actually an executive board. And the legislative members are authorized to do this under Article 16, Section 1 of the Constitution, California Constitution, which was amended back in the 60s to specifically allow this. And that provision says, notwithstanding any other provision of the Constitution, legislative members may sit as executive members of this board. It's a very unusual. I don't know of any other state board or commission that has that composition. So it's sort of an interesting role and a task to put on legislative members because they're not used to wearing an executive hat. They're not used to being subject to Bagley Keene. But that's what Madam Chair was trying to make clear at the outset. I just kind of wanted to elaborate a little bit on that, why that is.
Oh, thank you. That's helpful. Yeah. No, this was, when I started this job in May, I had a steep learning curve on Bagley Keene, so I'm grateful for your time. Anything else, Mr. Patton?
Oh, and I think, Sam, you have the outline. Will you set it on the table, please, and maybe just leave up here with Lisa sufficient copies, and we'll pass them around. Oh, you already have them. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Patton.
And thank you, Ted and Julia.
Okay, thank you.
We really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Yeah, I know. I think we've all learned a lot. So I think now, and Ms. Burke and Mr. O'Donnell, and happy birthday, Mr. O'Donnell. I was going to bring cupcakes, belated, but my children wouldn't let me get out of the house early enough. No, I wish. I know, right? So we did, before you got here, in addition to welcoming Ms. Burke, we did pull from this agenda the regulatory discussion, and we'll postpone that at a time that's agreeable to the board. So with that, we will move on to the consent agenda, please.
Consent agenda is ready for your approval.
Great, thank you. Is there any public comment on the consent agenda? Any questions from the board? Moved by Mr. O'Donnell, seconded by Mr. Diaz. Ms. Jones, will you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Senator Wilk?
Aye.
Senator Leyva? Assemblymember O'Donnell? Assemblymember Burke? Juan Morales?
Aye.
Cesar Diaz? Daniel Kim?
Aye.
Gail Miller?
Aye. Thank
And that
you.
motion carries.
Thank you very much. We will now move to financial reports, Ms. Silverman.
Just, I'll condense it tonight, so.
Thank you. We
Save some
appreciate that.
time. Yeah, so just part of the consent agenda, we had over 90 projects for $440 million that was approved. So thank you for that. Appreciate the work. And then we also had recovered nearly $400,000 in project funds. So just want to report that to the board.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So we will now move on to the appeals. Ms. Kampminer?
Thank you. We have one appeal tonight, and that is for Trinity Alps Unified in Trinity County. And the request for this appeal is two-part. The first is the district is requesting financial hardship under other evidence of reasonable effort. And the district is also requesting expedited apportionments outside of the priority funding process. And I will start by saying that staff does support both requests from the district. A little bit of history. This relates to facility hardship projects at the district's elementary and high school campuses, where in June of 2019, they discovered extensive mold in the facilities. They did testing, and it was determined that they were required to shut the facilities. They were not safe for students and staff to be in the buildings. So they did do that, and as a result, had to construct a temporary campus for both schools so that they could begin the school year on time. And actually, I think they did it just couple days after the school year was planned to start. So they've got some portables up there that they are having to lease on a monthly basis. We have been working with the district for a number of months to assist with the preparation and filing of the funding applications for facility hardship. And at this point, we can confirm that the district does meet the criteria for the facility hardship health and safety program. They have the necessary industry specialist reports. They're working on their scope documents, going through the plan approval process with the state architect, et cetera. However, they do not meet the administrative requirements for financial hardship. So typically under financial hardship, we're able to approve it at the staff level if the district has met certain criteria, including having a bonding capacity lower than $5 million, if they've passed a bond in the past 2 years, or if they're at 60% of bonded indebtedness. And the district has not really had a need to do many of these things in the past several years. They've been handling their facilities needs with one-time funds or through their regular maintenance funding. So they have not been in that position where we could administratively approve this. However, once they found out about the mold and the cost and the scope that it was going to require to get the facilities back into a usable condition, they did go ahead and put a bond on the local ballot, which will be heard on Tuesday, and voters will be making a decision on that. And they did bond for the maximum amount that they could sell under the Prop 39 requirements, which was a little over $16 million. The board, upon request of the district through the appeal process, can request that, or the district can request that the board consider other evidence that the district is making all efforts at the local level to fund their matching share. And when we get these appeals, we do consider them on a case-by-case at the staff level and try to provide a recommendation. And there are several points that do lead staff to a position of support on this particular case. One, that they did go out and put the bond out there as soon as they could after the discovery of the mold. They've also pledged the proceeds of any bond sales at the local level to offset or reimburse the financial hardship provided if the board does opt to approve this appeal today. And the district, the cost of the temporary housing has had a big impact on the district's general fund. They have exhausted their reserves. They've gone forward with some of the mold remediation, but they're at a point where they need assistance from the financial hardship program, or they need that local bond to pass before they can continue to go forward. And the kids can't go back in the buildings right now. So the circumstances to us seemed severe and actually seemed exactly what this provision was designed for these very unique circumstances where we need to help out. So on that point, that's why we are recommending the financial hardship other evidence. In addition, the district does have cash flow needs to get the projects moving forward. Right now, as part of this agenda, we have a funding item for the design funds for the elementary school. They are ready to take the next step on that project. It will require approval from the state architect, which should be coming shortly, but there are a few things they need to do on the construction drawings. And then the high school projects is coming very soon. The district, given that they need to get back in the classrooms quickly, rather than wait for the priority funding process, which would be subject to future bond sales and several months down the line, the district is asking for immediate apportionments for the item that we have before us today, and then for those future items which will be coming either to March or the April board most likely. And staff does support that, given the circumstances. So we would have cash available to provide the little over $700,000 available tonight, and then the future scope as well. So with that, we are recommending that the board provide several or approve two options, option A1 and option B1 of the staff recommendation. Option A1 does provide the apportionment, the financial hardship status for the elementary school design funding. And then option B1 provides that same status to the future projects for the high school and then the full funding for the elementary school. I believe the district is here tonight to address any questions that the board may have.
Great, thank you very much. Will you come on up, sir? Thank you. It's been moved and seconded, moved by Senator Leyva, seconded by Ms. Burke. Sir, why don't you come on up, and looks like you're in good shape, so if you want to keep your comments short.
Sure. I'm just here if you have any questions.
Thank you very much. You just want to, although now I learned you don't have to, but if you want to state your name for the record.
Jamie Green, Trinity Alps Unified.
Thank you very much. Anything you want to add, sir?
I just wanted to really thank the CDE and OPSE and DGS. We have felt like family from the start. We were in uncharted waters. We didn't know what to do, and it's so impressive seeing the state high-level people work at a high level that they've been helping us all the way through it. We understand this is a process. And I just wanted to say, if from Trinity County, we provide the water for the rest of the state. We have timber, and as a state, we also have roads because of Southern California and because of Central California. And I think as a state, united we stand and divided we fall. So we all work together on this. I think we can get a good outcome for everybody. So we're here to be humbled, and we're here to say thank you.
Well, you know, I do just one moment of how incredibly well this process has worked, and to Ms. Camp Meinert, who is truly the most humble public servant I've ever, you know, going up to Trinity multiple times and seeing the students, seeing the school, and the way, Mr. Green, you worked with our staff, you did this together, you didn't hire outside help, we learned from our mistakes. I think it's an incredibly good example of how well this system can work, and certainly one that hopefully will be precedential in terms of all working together, as you would say, united, and hopefully we can work to resolve some of these same problems across the state. So
Thank you.
I hope we can all learn from your example. Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments?
Yes, I just have a comment. I'm like my board members. I'm always ever mindful of any kind of precedent we set, especially when it comes to potentially providing financial hardship and qualifying for that, especially under this other evidence provision. That said, I think this is a very unique case, and I think Ms. Kampminer mentioned why. I think you've got a unique circumstance in which the school district did not choose this. You were required to get out of that school. This was a life safety matter, and you spent a lot of money, all your reserves on this, and the temporary structures, they're not going to be viable. And you've done everything right from the perspective of addressing this up front, talking to our staff up front. You were very good about minimizing the work associated with the costs for construction. And I think what really sets this apart is that you have committed, in the event that you have the local bond, to offset the financial hardship. I think that's a very, very strong. So I'm very impressed with what you're doing, and I very much support.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. And I'm just going to, Senator Leyva, clarify your motion. It's to approve items A1 and B1. Ms. Burke, great. Thank you very much. May we take the roll?
Senator Wilk? Aye. Senator Leyva? Aye. Assemblymember O'Donnell? Assemblymember Burke? Juan Morales? Aye. Cesar Diaz? Aye. Daniel Kim?
Aye.
Gail Miller?
Aye.
And that motion carries.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you so
Green.
much.
We really appreciate it. We will now move on to item 7, the vice chair selection. So-
I'd like to make a motion.
Please, Senator Will.
I'd like to make a motion for my colleague, Councilman O'Donnell, to be vice chair.
Great, we appreciate that. Oh my goodness, who do you want to second you, Mr. O'Donnell? So moved by Senator Wilk, seconded by Ms. Burke. May we have a roll call on that motion, please?
On that one, yes. Senator Wilk.
Aye.
Senator Leyva. Assemblymember O'Donnell. Assemblymember Burke. Juan Morales.
Aye.
Cesar Diaz.
Aye.
Daniel Kim.
Aye.
Gail Miller.
Aye.
And that motion does carry.
Yay, congratulations, Mr. O'Donnell. We look forward to working with you and again, appreciate your leadership on all of these issues. Thank you very much. And not just because it was your birthday yesterday. We will now move to closed session. Are we done? Yeah, okay. So pursuant to, I have to read this, to Government Code Section 11126E1, we will move to closed session for the purposes of conferring with and receiving advice from counsel regarding the status of a pending lawsuit. And Mr. Patton, can you give us the name?
Thank you, and we should identify the pending litigation. There are 3 matters pending. CBIA, California Building Industry Association versus SAB, the Cash et al. Versus SAB, and San Bernardino versus SAB.
Great, thank you very much. So we are going to ask the audience if we may please be excused. And Ms. Jones, are we for the, is the TV off for the closed session? Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Hi, Sam. Okay, the State Allocation Board is back in open session. We met in closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 11126E1 for the purpose of conferring with and receiving advice from counsel regarding the status of 3 pending lawsuits, CBIA versus SAB and Fremont, Cash et al. Versus SAB, and San Bernardino City Unified School District versus the SAB. And is there any other public comment? Any questions from members? Ms. Jones will call the roll on a couple items, and then we will adjourn.
Assemblymember O'Donnell, how do you vote on the minutes? And Assemblymember Burke, I know you weren't here, but how do you vote on the minutes?
Oh, you know what?
Okay. Great, and that motion still carries.
Thank you. No. Anything else that's still open, Ms. Jones? We're good? Okay, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Good job, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Diaz.
So you're gonna be my person?